Hello and welcome to today's episode of Platinum Talks Wealth. Emmy Nominated journalist Jennifer Rogers Markwell changed gears in her television career when she realized the need to help women make sense of investing. She regularly hosts educational workshops to empower women and others to take charge of their financial future. Now, join your host, Platinum Wealth Management President Jennifer Rogers Markwell, as she leads us into the world of money memories, money infidelities, and how these can mold our relationship with our personal finances as adults. Let's dive into today's episode.
I'm Jennifer Rogers Markwell, and you're joining us on the Platinum Talks Wealth podcast. I'm joined by Tiffany Ryder. Tiffany, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thanks for having me, Jennifer. I'm so happy to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. So you have a really unique story. So if you're open, I would love to hear more about your journey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a practicing emergency medicine physician associate at University of Maryland and a healthcare consultant. I've recently opened my own health and wellness consulting company, Lucid Wellness, where we're working with clients in a couple of different ways, one-on-one executive wellness coaching and doing some things with groups in the corporate arena. But I started my career 20 years ago as an exercise scientist and NFL cheerleader, professional dancer. And so it has not been a linear path for me.
I totally resonate with your story so much because my path is clearly not the same as yours, but different but similar. So it's the same but different.
Yeah.
So I think going from, one aspect that doesn't necessarily feed into the next aspect, like such a unique journey. So tell us, let's rewind a little. Tell us where you were, kind of how that unfolded, what you were doing, how you became a cheerleader, kind of the backstory there, and then how you evolved to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting because, when I look at it on paper, it, is absolutely the non-linear path that it seems to be. But, my experience of it completely makes sense. How I went from one place to the other. So I came originally from a small town in rural Louisiana. Never had any thoughts of moving outside of my tiny town, much less, across the country and becoming a professional dancer. But for me, it was really, I got married young and moved. My husband was in the Air Force and ended up in the DC area and was really looking for a way to prove to myself and to my family and all of the, people that I had grown up with that I was big and I could find my power and I could find my place in the world. And so I had met someone along the way who had tried out for a professional dance team. And I thought, well, that's the biggest thing I could ever imagine. I went and tried out for 3 different teams that year because, we're fortunate enough to have, easy local access in the area that I was in. And I didn't make it past the first round in any of these things, right? So it was like, I was a young woman and I had convinced myself that I was brave and I was going to do this big thing and I didn't make it. And I said, well, well, now what do you do? What do you do when you've decided that your heart's set on doing this accomplishment? And I was going to prove everyone wrong, and then I didn't get there. And I think for me in my young life, that was the first time I'd ever been faced with this idea of, what are my boundaries? How high can we go? Can hard work and planning, get me where I need to be? Or are there things that just aren't attainable or accessible to me? And that was the first time I'd ever had to consult that question. And so thankfully, I took that year between not making it past the first round at all 3 auditions and getting into the next cycle. And really, sought counsel and tried to figure out how was I going to become this person, that I wanted to be. I had gotten pregnant at 18 and had my first baby at 19. And so I was 25 pounds overweight. I had been diagnosed with prediabetes and polycystic ovarian syndrome. So I had some health things going on that were related to my fitness level. And I said, I really want this and I'm going to do what I have to do. And at the time, I was in college full time and working full time. And I had this little one. And so it was like 5 a.m., waking up and doing the best I can. And people, I found that people wanted to help me, right? Like people could see that I was interested, that I was willing to do the work, and that I just needed input. I just needed help. And I think that was another great lesson that came through that. So I ended up, losing the 25 pounds and getting rid of my prediabetes diagnosis, and my cycles were regular again, so PCOS wasn't impacting me as much. And I think it's what actually first inspired my interest in medicine and fitness, and gave me the sense that I could do things. I was in control of my life somewhat. And I made the team, and that also ended up being a really positive force for me, because coming from this rural area where a lot of the women that I looked up to took care of the home and they supported their husbands and they raised their children, I didn't have a lot of female role models that were doing big things outside of the home. And so entering that world of cheerleading, I was able to, I had access to politicians who were doing big things, and, newscasters and TV people and women leading, corporations and things like that. And so it really opened up this whole world of what was possible and what being a young woman could mean for me.
That's
So,
quite the story. And I feel like you hit it. I mean, as you're telling it, I was like, oh, I see the seeds that were planted in healthcare and medicine, like early on for you, just from your personal experiences, it sounds like.
absolutely. Absolutely. Another thing that an opportunity I had from that experience was the NFL has a tight relationship with the USO. And so I really had the opportunity to volunteer in ways that I wouldn't have otherwise had the opportunity. My dad was a veteran, and so I hopped on, volunteered for all of the things that had to do with the troops. And I ended up meeting and forming relationships with people at Walter Reed Army Medical Center at the time, is what it was called. And this was during the time that we had young people who were essentially the same age as I was, coming back injured from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I was able to complete an internship. They asked me to complete an internship there as a recreational therapist. So, they didn't really have it before. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do in medicine, but they said, look, we like your energy. Why don't you come on board? And I'm sure we can find something inspiring and useful for you to do. And I was able to go in, day in and day out and work alongside these occupational therapists and physical therapists and, doctors and surgeons, and seeing what an impact that they were able to have on these young soldiers and their families and their kids and, their relationships. And it was history by that point, right? I said, okay, I'm in the midst of this, trying to dance professionally and do all of this, but that's not going to last forever. And when I've decided it's over, I know where I'm going. So that's how I ended
awesome.
up there.
What a journey.
Yeah. It was, it was exciting. It was fresh. It was something that I never expected, but it's also been, I think, the most impactful source of positive reinforcement that I've ever lived through, right? It was like this thing that was denied to me, and then I worked really hard for it, and I just kept getting help along the way and kept getting inputs along the way that encouraged me to keep going, and essentially, have changed my life from here on out.
So from there, how did you end up evolving into your own entrepreneurial spirit, quite frankly?
Yeah. So that was an even longer journey. So, I was here with the NFL for a couple of years. I ended up moving overseas, I was in Frankfurt and danced with the dance team that was associated with the Frankfurt Galaxy. So back when the NFLE was a thing. And so that was, just a wonderful opportunity. I was able to travel around Europe and, meet new people and experience new cultures. Um, but at some point, my body decided that it was tired of trying to keep up with the 22-year-olds that I was dancing near. And I said, okay, maybe this is that moment I've been waiting for. And I actually had learned German so that I could apply to medical school in Frankfurt, had taken a semester there, and then was hearing all of these, scary stories about how if I finish school there, I may not be able to get a residency here in the United States, and I may not ever be able to come home and practice. And for me, that was, I had to do some soul searching at that point and decide, where did I want to go with my life? What was I doing? So at that point, I had been overseas for several years. I had been dancing and was not, in the exercise science. I wasn't using my degree. And so I wanted to come back to the US so that I could apply to medical school, apply to PA school, sort of figure out what was going on. Um, but I was having trouble getting a job. And, it was tough. And so I applied. I wasn't getting any responses. And so I ended up reaching out to people that I had previously worked with. And I said, does anybody have anything? And I was able to get a very entry level position that didn't pay very well, wasn't anything super exciting, but part of the job was to work on this research study as a liaison with Hopkins, doing work with patients who were suffering from metabolic syndrome, which is essentially very, very similar to what I had been diagnosed with before, this prediabetes, sort of insulin resistance, and hypertension and some other things going along with that. But I said, wow, to work with Hopkins, what an opportunity. So I took the job. Little did I know that the COO of the company that had hired me, this was his pet project. And so he was in on these meetings. I had no idea who this gentleman was, right? But I'm here doing the best I can, trying to figure out what I'm doing. And at some point, I got a call and they said, well, we need you to come to Charlottesville. And I was like, well, what's in Charlottesville? Like, I don't understand. I was in the DC area. And anyway, and they said, well, the COO wants to meet with you. He thinks you're doing a good job and wants to see if you can do something more.
Wow.
Right. So this was like, so then I'm thinking, well, I always wanted to practice medicine, but do I need to practice medicine? Because really what I want is to help people. I want to help people, lose weight and be more confident and be the healthiest version of themselves. And so anyway, so I end up, long story short, I go to Charlottesville. I end up getting promoted several times. Things are wonderful. I'm in this space where I'm like working with these people, these doctors at Hopkins that I think are amazing. And we're designing programs for corporate wellness initiatives, and I'm checking all the boxes, but I was missing this fulfillment of being able to sit next to a patient and explain something to them, or that emotional connection of being able to empower an individual with, information and confidence and all of that, which is essentially what I really wanted out of this whole thing. And so, I did some soul searching again, and I said, I really think I need this. So I had decided that I was going to apply to PA school. My chain of command was, very supportive, but at the same time didn't want to lose me. I got into PA school. They offered me, to double my salary. And I said, I think this is something I just need for me. So I start school and immediately COVID happens.
Oh.
And the world was upside down. And so, it turned out for me that was just, it was great. It was great that I had decided to pursue that at that time because, the world wasn't going to go on the way that it was. And so, so I finished school. I started working in the emergency room, and I now have that opportunity that I want, right? To sit next to my patients and guide them through. But now I want scale, right? Now I'm greedy and I'm like, okay, well, it's nice for, you know, the people I'm able to see to be able to do this. But what if I could do this for 5 times as many people? What if I could, have a greater impact? And so, at that point I said, okay, maybe there's a way for me to do both. And that's sort of what prompted this transition into entrepreneurship, even though I've still got my foot in the door in the emergency department.
I love that. I mean, that is a fantastic story. And I love that you had said too, how can I help more people on a bigger basis, which is beautiful.
I think it's so selfish, but it's so wonderful, right? Like I want to help people and I want to see that impact. And so it's been a great journey. I'm enjoying entrepreneurship. I'm enjoying meeting people like you and, just networking and finding out, more about the people in the world.
Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
So one additional thing, well, we talk about lots of things on this podcast, clearly, but one thing we like to talk about is also money memories. So with that journey, I'm sure at some point you had a relationship with money, maybe with a younger person or as a, small child. What was a money memory that you have that you feel kind of molded your relationship to money as it is now and has it evolved as well?
Absolutely. It's an interesting concept of money memories. And I don't know that I can definitively say I understand what my relationship is with money even now. My first memories of when I realized that money was impactful and that it mattered probably stem from early childhood. When I was 10, my parents got divorced. And prior to that time, we had enough money that I didn't think about money. My dad was in the oil field. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. And my dad actually got laid off when I was 10. And, my first introduction to what is money and does it matter was really, my parents arguing every night, yelling at each other regarding what were they going to do regarding this, this layoff and this huge change. My dad had been a veteran and come home and taken over his father's business and had never had a chance to go to college and was really hoping to be able to go to college during that time. And my mom was a stay-at-home mom and had finished nursing school, but had never worked and was nervous about entering the workforce herself. And it just created a lot of conflict, which eventually ended their marriage.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, it was impactful to me as a young girl with no control over the financial situation. And I do think that it's something that taught me that money is unpredictable and scary and life altering. And from that point, we went from being, very comfortable middle class family to living in 2 separate houses that both households were very much under the poverty line. Greatly changed the situation. My dad did end up going back to school. My mom did, work as a nurse at night. And it's interesting. She ended up, taking a settlement or something that she had gotten out of the divorce and wanted to buy a business with it because she wasn't making ends meet nursing. And so she took all of the money out of the retirement account or, wherever this was. I don't know, it was 10. And she bought a skating rink, and I was, probably 12 at this time. My brother was fresh in college, and she bought the skating rink, and she had this vision, that she was going to make it like a fun, family business. My brother was working there, and he was interested in helping because he was a young man and he was learning. And in my eyes, he was an adult. but the business failed. The business
Oh,
failed. And my mom entered into a deep depression at that time. My brother felt responsible, even though, as an adult now, I look at it and I say, well, he was a 20-year-old. How responsible could he have been for this, for this large thing? But he ended up, really suffering and struggling from that. And I think that that is a moment that really changed the course of his life. And so it was like 2 years in a row, right? I ended up in this place where my life had been greatly affected by money and I had no idea, what was happening. There was no control. It was just life altering. And I really spent the rest of my childhood watching both of my parents make ends meet. And we lived in houses that, there was heat in one room of the house. And, the whole family slept in one room because that's what we could afford to heat. And, the roof leaked. And when the roof would leak, you would pull all of the pots out. And, and it wasn't like it leaked like in one spot. It was like you emptied the kitchen of the pots and went them around the house. And this is what we thought was normal. Um, and, there's I tell my kids now who, have lived a more comfortable and safe and stable life financially, like there are things that you learn that I didn't get to learn, right? Like of course you don't spend 100% of every dollar that you make. But for me, it was, well, if we want to eat, let's go dig for change out of the couch cushions, or let's go dig for change in the car so that we could go to the bread store on the day before they throw out the bread and get the bread for 90% off. Like, this was a different reality. And I feel like all of those things made me who I am today. And I'm happy with who I am. I'm happy to be empathetic and to understand other people's situations and to be grateful for the things that I have and the opportunities that I have. But there's an effect to that. And I'm certain that it's affected my ability to make money and my self-confidence and my relationship with money in my business and in my personal life.
well, thank you for sharing. And it sounds like you're able to teach your children lessons financially that you weren't able to learn because of your situation before, but hopefully they can learn from what you've been through. And then also with the, tools that you're providing them now.
Yeah, I mean, we all as parents, we do the best we can. Um, and I'm happy that I've had, this as part of my story, but it's certainly something that, I think I took away from that experience that I could be a good person and not have money. But what I didn't realize, I think for many years, was that that doesn't mean that having money makes me a bad person. And I think that like that took me so much longer to come to, right? But it was almost like I was running away from opportunities to be powerful or financially empowered because I wanted to be a good person and I convinced myself that, being poor and being okay with that was the route to that. And so, it's an adventure and it's a mindset that still requires work sometimes, but
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate you being vulnerable and raw in that moment too. So another thing we like to chat through is financial infidelities, whether it's something that you've experienced or something that you know, had someone else experience that you were able to witness. What's something that you're open to sharing that you think folks could learn from?
yeah, when I think about financial or when I think about infidelities at all, I think about like actions that aren't congruent with my value system or what I believe, right? And I think probably the biggest one that stands out for me was in my first marriage. Um, coming from the background that I came from, I didn't know a lot about money. I didn't understand a lot about, I don't know, the way a mortgage works or the way a retirement account works and things like that. And in my virtue to be a good way for, a good partner, I took myself out of that equation. So when conversations would come up about, retirement or what should we do or how should we do these things, I I tended to, defer to my husband to make those choices and give away my power. And then if for some reason the situation didn't turn out the way that I wanted it to be later, or I, decided to learn about it later, then I found it really easy to be resentful of whatever choices he had made as if he had taken that power from me. Um, and and that's certainly not something that I'm proud of. And it's certainly not a way that, I would encourage other women to be or other people to be. But I think that was the place that I was in. And it's something that, wasn't fair to me and wasn't fair to my husband and was certainly something that I would say is a money infidelity, right? Like stepping away and not taking responsibility for, not taking power for financial decisions really took power away from me in my relationship, in my existence as a human, right? As an adult in
Yeah.
a lot of ways that I didn't realize at the time.
That is a super interesting perspective. Super interesting. Thank you for sharing that too. That's actually the first time I've heard that perspective.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that will be, for folks that are listening, hopefully impactful because that's true, right? That's so
Yeah.
true because you do want to have an integral part in that financial relationship, whatever that looks like. And I always share too, like with, when clients come in and there's one that's more active and the other one doesn't,
Hmm.
participate as much. I'm like, what if, Lord forbid,
Hmm.
something happens to that person?
Yep.
What's that going to look like? I mean, I think of my own personal experiences, right? My
Sure.
grandpa was the guy, and my grandma was not. And when he passed, we were like, oh gosh, what does this look like now? So I think really having, regardless of what that looks like, budgeting,
Sure.
checkbooks, investments, whatever that is, yes, take an active role. But thank you for sharing that too.
Yeah. And it's something that's really, I mean, it's had such a huge impact, on me since realizing that, right? Like since coming to that realization. And it's interesting because I'm not always able to share that effectively, like with my parents or with other people, um, to convey the power that I have from being knowledgeable and in control of my own money. But it's something that, in my current relationship, I I insist on having my own money, and it's almost like I have it set up where we have joint expenses in one account, but then it feels like a gift. Like I get to contribute my portion to this joint account because I am an adult that participates and takes responsibility for my decisions. But at the same time, um, I feel more free to be me, and I feel like he's more free to be him. And I never really understood that before. So I remember once when we were dating early on, we went to a bar, and I was like in a position where I was in school and I was not in a position to be buying the entire bar a drink. And frankly, in my opinion, neither was he. But he said, he met these people and he was like, I'm going to buy the next round for everybody. And I remember thinking, I was angry, right? I was angry inside. Like, why would you buy the next round for everyone? You can't afford that. And then it occurred to me that my money was my money and his money was his money. And the money that was going, into the joint expenses was not going to be affected by any decision, right? And it's a silly story, but I feel really empowered and I feel like I have permission to, I don't know, buy the fancy bread at the grocery store if that's what I want to do with my money. And it's been, it's a lesson that I really wish I had learned earlier on.
Oh, well, that's a good one. Thank you for sharing that. And that actually ties into my next and last question as we wrap things up. So when it comes to money, how are you utilizing it different or uniquely in your own household? And that also kind of ties into what you just shared as well.
Yeah. So I really have come to love budgeting. So I don't budget.
Yes.
I don't budget everything because I know, if I do a line item for everything, then it takes up too much of my time and I can't keep track of everything, right? But I've got a number that I'm comfortable spending on the credit card for all of the joint expenses, right? And it's interesting because my personal credit card, it's easier to fudge, right? But when I'm sharing with this person, it's like, well, this is what we agreed. And I think, back to teaching my kids things, it's been a really fun adventure. We've done this for several years now, but it's like, if we say that we're going to spend $100 on groceries for the month, which obviously is exaggerated, right? But once it gets to 95, it's like, okay, we're poor, guys. We are poor. Like, what are we going to do for dinner, right? It almost becomes like a game of how can we stick to this limit that we've set for ourselves, not because when I was a child, there isn't anything else, but because this is what we've decided we believe is appropriate and we would like to do. And I think that's been, it's been really refreshing and nice to find a way to make that a fun experience and a good experience. So,
and way to teach your kids and be on the same page with your partner as well.
Yeah, it worked out nicely. I'm happy about it.
Well, thank you so much. Such a pleasure meeting you and having you share. I greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And hopefully those of you listening will join us on our next Platinum Talks Wealth podcast.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, Platinum Talks Wealth, please subscribe and share. For more information about Jennifer Rogers Markwell or Platinum Wealth Management, please visit www.platinumwealth.net. Securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member of FINRA and SIPC. The opinions voiced in this podcast are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a decision. The guest speakers and their companies are not affiliated with or endorsed by LPL Financial or Platinum Wealth Management.